Is this some kind of joke? The voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of activity on the Naval Air Station's main helipad. Captain Thorne, his crisp white uniform a beacon of authority under the afternoon sun, looked down at the old man. "Are you lost, sir? Or do you just make a habit of wandering onto active military installations?" Bruce Whitaker, 86 years old, did not flinch. He stood near the edge of the painted landing circle, his hands resting calmly on the handle of a simple wooden cane. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, were fixed on a Sea Stallion helicopter being prepped for flight across the tarmac, his expression unreadable. He wore a simple windbreaker, khaki pants, and worn-out sneakers. To the captain, he was an obstacle, an anomaly that needed to be corrected. "I'm waiting," Thorne said, his impatience growing. He exchanged a frustrated glance with the two junior officers standing behind him. They mirrored his confident posture, but their eyes held a flicker of unease. "This is a restricted area. I need to see some identification, and I need you to explain what you're doing here." Now, the captain's voice was accustomed to instant obedience, a finely tuned instrument of command, but the old man seemed immune to its power. He simply turned his head slowly, his gaze finally meeting Thorne's. There was no fear in his eyes, no confusion, only a profound, bottomless sense of patience, as if he were watching a familiar play unfold, one he'd seen many times before. The quiet dignity in the old man's posture seemed to infuriate the captain more than any outright defiance could have. "This isn't a public park, old-timer," Thorne snapped, stepping closer, invading the man's personal space. He was a decade younger than Bruce, but carried himself with the certainty of a man who believed his rank made him ageless and infallible. "This is the sharp end of the spear. We have work to do here, important work. We don't have time for tourists." A small crowd was beginning to form. Enlisted ground crew, pilots in their flight suits, and other officers, all drawn by the spectacle of their commanding officer dressing down a civilian who could have been their grandfather. They kept a respectful distance, but their presence turned the tarmac into a stage. The air grew thick with unspoken questions and a palpable sense of discomfort. Bruce Whitaker slowly reached into his back pocket, his movements deliberate, unhurried. He produced a worn leather wallet, the kind that had molded itself to its owner's shape over decades. He carefully extracted a state-issued driver's license and handed it to the captain. Thorne snatched it from his hand. "Bruce Whitaker," he read aloud, his tone dripping with condescension. "Well, Bruce, that tells me your name, but it doesn't tell me what you're doing on my helipad." He handed the ID back as if it were contaminated. "Do you have a pass, an escort, anyone who can vouch for you before I have you removed?" Bruce simply shook his head, his silence a stark contrast to Thorne's aggressive verbosity. He said nothing, his gaze drifting back to the helicopters, a flicker of something ancient and sorrowful in their depths. The captain's face hardened. He saw the silent crowd, and his need to reassert his authority grew. He felt his control of the situation slipping, not because the old man was fighting back, but precisely because he wasn't. It was like shouting at a mountain. "Look at you," Thorne said, his voice lowering into a venomous, mocking drawl. He gestured at Bruce's simple attire. "You come here to a place of discipline, of purpose, dressed like you're going to feed pigeons. What could you possibly have to contribute here? What could you possibly understand about what we do?" He leaned in closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Let me give you some advice. Men like us," he said, gesturing to himself in his pristine uniform, "we're still in the fight. We're still needed. Maybe it's time you found a nice, quiet place to sit and remember your glory days, because they are clearly long over." The insult hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The junior officers shifted their weight. One of the ground crew chiefs, busying himself near the helicopter, suddenly found a bolt that required his absolute, unwavering attention. His head ducked low. The disrespect was so blatant, so unnecessary, that it soured the air. Thorne, emboldened by the old man's continued silence, felt a surge of triumph. He had won. He had put the strange, disruptive old man in his place. He pointed a finger at Bruce's chest. "So for the last time, tell me who you are and what you're doing here, or my men will be happy to escort you to a holding cell while we figure it out." His finger brushed against a small object pinned to the lapel of Bruce's windbreaker. It was a small, tarnished silver pin. It was unremarkable, so dull it was almost invisible against the dark fabric of the jacket. It looked like something a child might get from a gumball machine. Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "What's this little trinket?" he asked, flicking it with his fingernail. The metallic tap was startlingly loud in the tense silence. "Get a prize in a cereal box, did we? A little souvenir to remember your visit." The moment his finger touched the pin, the world fell away for Bruce Whitaker. The scent of jet fuel and the concrete heat of the helipad were replaced by the thick, humid air of a jungle clearing 60 years ago. The whine of the sea stallion's turbines became the deafening percussive roar of a Huey's rotors, whipping his hair and stinging his eyes with dust and debris. He wasn't an old man on a peaceful naval base. He was a young lieutenant kneeling in the mud. A hand slick with blood pressed that same silver pin into his palm. It was warm. He could hear a voice, weak and ragged, whispering through the chaos. "Don't lose this. It got me through." The memory was a flash of lightning in a dark room, blinding, visceral, and gone in an instant. He blinked, and the helipad snapped back into focus. Captain Thorne's smug face was still there, his fingers still hovering near the pin. Bruce's expression hadn't changed, but something deep inside him had settled, a cold, hard resolve. In the small crowd of onlookers, Petty Officer Second Class Maria Davis felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She was a young aviation mechanic, sharp and observant. She had seen this kind of arrogance from officers before, but there was something different about this. It wasn't just a clash of authority, it was a violation. She didn't know who the old man was, but she saw the way he stood. He wasn't lost, he was anchored. He stood on that helipad like a man who had every right to be there, a right that went deeper than any rank or uniform. When Captain Thorne mocked the pin, Davis made her decision. While the captain was preening, enjoying his own performance, she took 3 quiet steps back, melting into the periphery. She slipped behind a large maintenance cart, her heart pounding. This was a risk. Going over a captain's head was a dangerous game, but leaving that old man to be humiliated and dragged away by security felt like a crime. She pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling slightly as she scrolled through her contacts. She didn't call base security. She didn't call the officer of the deck. She called the one person on the base who valued wisdom over rank, a man who had been her mentor since she first arrived, Master Chief Petty Officer Elias Vance. He answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, gravelly baritone. "Vance." "Master Chief, it's Davis," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "I'm on the main helipad. We have a situation." "What kind of situation, Petty Officer?" "It's Captain Thorne, Master Chief. He's berating an elderly civilian, a really old man. He's threatening to have him arrested." There was a pause on the other end. "A civilian? What's he doing on the flight line?" "I don't know, Master Chief, but there's something not right about this. The old man, he's just standing there, taking it. But his eyes, he looks like he's seen everything. He's not confused. He's waiting." She took a breath. The captain just took his ID. The man's name is Bruce Whitaker. She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. A profound, stunned silence followed. For a moment, Davis thought the call had dropped. "Davis?" Master Chief Vance's voice was completely different now. It was stripped of all casualness, replaced by a crystalline, urgent authority she had never heard from him before. "What did you say the name was?" "Whitaker, Master Chief. Bruce Whitaker." Another beat of silence, heavier than the first. "My God," Vance breathed. "Davis, listen to me very carefully. You cannot let Captain Thorne move that man. I don't care what you have to do. Spill something. Fake an emergency. Create a diversion. You keep the captain and Mr. Whitaker on that helipad. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Master Chief, but..." "No buts. And one more thing. As soon as you hang up with me, you call the base admiral's office. You tell his aide that Bruce Whitaker is on the main helipad with Captain Thorne. Use those exact words. Now go." The line went dead. Davis stood frozen for a second, the weight of the command settling on her. The admiral's office? Who was this old man? She pocketed her phone, her mind racing. The audience now sensed it too. A shift was coming. Help was on the way. Master Chief Vance didn't bother with the stairs. He took them 2 at a time, his polished shoes pounding a frantic rhythm on the concrete. He didn't knock on the admiral's door. He burst through it, a breach of protocol so severe that Admiral Hayes looked up from his desk, his face a thundercloud of annoyance. "Master Chief, what is the meaning of this?" Hayes demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Admiral, my apologies, but we have a Code Indigo situation on the main helipad." Code Indigo was an unofficial designation, a term Vance and the Admiral used for situations that were about to become political and public nightmares. Hayes put his pen down, his full attention now on Vance. "Talk." "Captain Thorne is publicly detaining an elderly civilian. Sir, the civilian's name is Bruce Whitaker." The name landed in the silent office like a grenade. Admiral Hayes's face went slack, the color draining from it. The formidable, commanding presence vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly rose from his chair, his hand gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white. "Whitaker, The Admiral's voice was a choked whisper. He cleared his throat. "Are you certain, Master Chief? The Bruce Whitaker, the ghost of Da Nang." "Petty Officer Davis confirmed the ID, sir," Vance said, his own voice tight with emotion. "She also said he's wearing a small, tarnished silver pin on his jacket." Admiral Hayes closed his eyes, a pained expression on his face. "Jensen's wing pin," he said, more to himself than to Vance. "He still has it." He opened his eyes, and the shock was gone, replaced by a cold, furious fire. "Get my car. Now. Get the base commander on the line and tell him to meet me on the helipad in 5 minutes. I want every available department head and senior officer there with him. Full dress uniform. Move." Vance was already gone before the last word left the Admiral's mouth. The quiet, orderly afternoon had just ended. A hurricane was about to make landfall on the main helipad. Back on the tarmac, Captain Thorne was oblivious, basking in the final moments of his perceived victory. He had the old man's ID back in his pocket, a piece of evidence for the report he would file. He had an audience. He had control. "Bruce Whitaker," he said, savoring the name. "Well, Bruce, it seems you've wandered far from home. For your own safety, I'm going to have my men escort you to a more secure location. We'll have someone evaluate you, make sure you're all right. It's for your own good. We can't have confused civilians wandering onto active flight lines. It's a matter of national security, you understand." He gave a sharp, imperious nod to the 2 junior security officers who had been hovering nearby. "Take Mr. Whitaker to the security office, gently." The last word was an afterthought, a hollow performance of concern for the benefit of the crowd. The 2 young officers looked at each other, then at Bruce. They stepped forward hesitantly. This felt wrong, and they knew it. But a captain's order was a captain's order. Bruce didn't move. He simply looked at Thorne, and for the first time his expression changed. The patience was still there, but it was now laced with a profound, aching disappointment. It was the look of a teacher watching his most promising student fail a simple, crucial test. He wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for the captain. That's when the sound began. It was faint at first, a distant siren, but it grew rapidly, a rising crescendo that was distinctly not from a fire truck or an ambulance. It was the multi-toned, urgent wail of command vehicles. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. A convoy of black sedans and command trucks appeared at the edge of the tarmac, moving at a speed that was utterly out of place in the controlled environment of the base. They screeched to a halt in a perfectly coordinated maneuver, their tires barking against the asphalt. Doors flew open with a unified percussive slam. Out stepped Admiral Hayes, his face a granite mask of fury. He was followed by the base commander, Master Chief Vance, and a dozen of the highest-ranking officers on the entire naval station. They were all in their immaculate dress uniforms, the gold on their sleeves and the ribbons on their chests glinting in the sun. They moved not like men walking, but like a wave surging forward, a tidal force of rank and authority aimed at a single point on the helipad. The crowd of sailors and pilots parted for them as if by instinct, a path clearing through the sea of bodies. Captain Thorne froze, his hand half raised to direct the security officers. His mouth fell slightly open. His entire world was tilting on its axis. He watched as the Admiral, the man who commanded the entire regional fleet, a man Thorne had only spoken to a handful of times, strode past him without so much as a glance. The Admiral's eyes were locked on the old man in the windbreaker. Admiral Hayes stopped precisely 3 feet in front of Bruce Whitaker. His back was ramrod straight, his posture a study in military perfection. He took a sharp breath, and then, in a movement that was fluid and absolute, he raised his right hand to his brow, executing the sharpest, most deeply respectful salute Captain Thorne had ever witnessed in his life. The salute was held, unwavering, a silent, powerful testament. The helipad fell into a stunning, complete silence. The only sound was the wind and the distant idle of the Sea Stallion's engines. Mr. Whitaker," Admiral Hayes's voice boomed, clear and strong, resonating across the tarmac. Every word was imbued with a reverence that bordered on awe. "It is an absolute honor to have you on my station, sir." Bruce Whitaker gave a slow, simple nod. "Admiral," he said, his own voice quiet but carrying in the stillness. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him, the weight of their collective gaze pressing down, suffocating him. He couldn't process what was happening. This old man, a sir, to an admiral. The Admiral did not lower his salute. He turned his head slightly, his eyes sweeping over the assembled crowd, ensuring every single person was listening. He was not just speaking to Bruce, he was teaching a lesson. He was correcting a grievous wrong. "For those of you who do not know," the Admiral began, his voice ringing with the pride of a historian reciting a sacred legend, The man standing before you is Bruce Whitaker. In 1968, then Lieutenant Whitaker was a Navy helicopter pilot flying combat search and rescue missions in Vietnam. His call sign was Ghost. A murmur went through the crowd. The older chiefs and master sergeants recognized the name instantly, their eyes widening in disbelief. During a mission deep in the Ashau Valley, the admiral continued, his voice painting a vivid picture. Lieutenant Whitaker's aircraft was shot down. He was the sole survivor. For 15 days wounded and with no supplies, he evaded capture in one of the most hostile territories of the war. But he didn't just survive. He located the wreckage of another downed Huey, found 6 surviving crewmen, 2 of them critically injured, and for a week he coordinated their defense and care. On the final day, with extraction inbound, their position was compromised. Lieutenant Whitaker carried a wounded door gunner on his back for the last 3 miles to the landing zone, providing covering fire as he went. The admiral paused, letting the weight of the story settle. He saved all 6 of those men. For his actions, he was awarded the Navy Cross. He was recommended for the Medal of Honor, but he refused it. His official statement was, and I quote, "The heroes are the ones who didn't come home." He requested his service record be sealed, and he has spent the last 60 years living a quiet life, asking for nothing, seeking no recognition. The silence that followed was one of pure, unadulterated awe. The young sailors were looking at Bruce not as a frail old man, but as a giant, a figure from the pages of their own history. Petty Officer Davis felt tears welling in her eyes, a deep sense of pride and shame warring within her. Pride in Bruce, and shame for the uniform of the man who had disrespected him. Captain Thorne looked as though he had been physically struck, his face pale and his body swaying slightly. Finally, Admiral Hayes lowered his hand. He turned his full icy attention to Captain Thorne. "Captain," he said, and the single word was colder than any Arctic wind. "My office, 1500 hours. You will be prepared to explain to me, in excruciating detail, why you felt it was your duty to publicly humiliate a living icon of the United States Navy." Thorne stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Sir, Admiral, that is the entire problem, Captain." The Admiral cut him off, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl. "You didn't know because you didn't care to look. You saw an old man, not a man's history. You saw civilian clothes, not a life of service. You saw what you wanted to see, and you failed this uniform and every person who has ever worn it." At that moment, Bruce Whitaker spoke. His voice was not loud, but in the profound silence it was the only thing that mattered. He looked at Captain Thorne, and there was no malice in his eyes, only a weary sadness. "Son," he said, and the simple paternal words seemed to shatter what little composure Thorne had left. "The uniform doesn't make the man, it just gives him a place to stand. It's what you do when the uniform is off, when no one is watching and there are no medals to be won. That's what defines you. You asked me if I was still needed." Bruce paused, his gaze sweeping over the young faces in the crowd before settling back on Thorne. "Every single day someone is needed, to show a little kindness, to offer a little respect, to see the person standing in front of them, not the category they fit in. That's the real mission, Captain, and it's one that never, ever ends." As Bruce spoke, he gently touched the tarnished silver pin on his lapel. The image flashed in his mind, clearer this time. A makeshift field hospital, the smell of antiseptic and death. Lieutenant Commander Jensen, a pilot he'd pulled from a burning wreck, lay on a cot, his breathing shallow. Jensen took the pilot's wing from his own uniform and pressed it into Bruce's hand. "You got me out, Ghost," he had whispered, a bloody froth on his lips. "You got me home. Keep this. Remember us." The pin wasn't a prize. It was a promise. It was the weight of memory, a duty to remember the ones who never got to grow old. The fallout was swift and decisive. Captain Thorne was not court-martialed or discharged. That would have drawn too much attention, something Bruce Whitaker would have never wanted. Instead, he was reassigned. He was given a desk at the Pentagon, a quiet paper-pushing job 1,000 miles from the sea and from any position of command. His career wasn't over, but his ascent was. He had been sidelined, a quiet but clear message to anyone who was paying attention. More importantly, Admiral Hayes instituted a new mandatory training program at the naval station. It was a course on naval history, but one focused on personal stories, on the lives and sacrifices of the men and women behind the famous battles. It was about respect, empathy, and the duty to see beyond the rank and the uniform. Unofficially, everyone on base called it the Whitaker Initiative. Weeks passed. The autumn air grew crisp. In a small diner a few miles from the base, Bruce Whitaker sat at the counter, a cup of black coffee steaming in front of him. He was just another old man enjoying a quiet morning. The bell over the door chimed. A man in a simple polo shirt and jeans walked in. He looked tired, older than he was. He sat a few stools down from Bruce, ordered a coffee, and stared into the cup for a long time. It was Thorn. Finally, he slid over one stool, then another, until he was next to Bruce. "Mr. Whitaker," he said quietly, his voice devoid of its former arrogance. Bruce turned his head slowly and nodded. "Captain." Thorn flinched at the title. "Just Alan now, sir." He took a deep breath. There's nothing I can say to fix what I did, but I needed to say I'm sorry. I was arrogant. I was blind. I was wrong." He pushed a small receipt across the counter. He had already paid for Bruce's coffee and breakfast. "That's all." Bruce looked at the man beside him. He saw the genuine remorse, the humbling that had been forced upon him. He picked up his coffee cup and took a slow sip. "The first step on any long journey is realizing you're on the wrong heading, Alan," Bruce said softly. "You've done that. All that's left is to set a new course." Thorn just nodded, his throat too thick to speak. He stood up, turned, and walked out of the diner, leaving his own coffee untouched. It wasn't a moment of grand forgiveness, but it was a moment of closure, a quiet and respectful end. Bruce Whitaker turned back to his coffee, alone at the counter, a silent hero enjoying a simple moment of peace he had earned 1,000 times over. Bruce Whitaker's story reminds us that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest of forms. If this story of courage and humility moved you, please hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of unassuming heroes.